Shalom everyone. There are teachings that are read and others that are revealed. Today we will delve into one of the strangest, deepest, and least understood layers of the Mishnah, the three differences of kind according to Rabbi Yehudah. Three small discrepancies hidden in a single chapter, which nevertheless trace a secret map of how tradition understands blessing, curse, and the spiritual identity of food. Because believe me, behind a simple fruit, behind a grain, behind a green leaf, there is more mystery than we imagine. Why does Rabbi Yehudah dare to say that there are foods over which one cannot recite a blessing? Why does he insist that some products are born from the curse itself? And why does he declare that the 7 species of Israel are not just symbols, but direct channels of blessing that must come first, even against the will of the diner? These are not technical differences. They are 3 cracks in reality, 3 thresholds, 3 warnings. And if we understand them, we will understand something that very few know, that the Mishnah speaks not only about what to eat or how to bless, but about how the world is ordered, how light is distinguished from darkness, and how every daily act, a bite of fruit, defines which side of that boundary we want to live on. Today we will open that hidden map. Today we will see why blessing is not automatic, why not everything that nourishes is blessed, and why, for Rabbi Yehudah, the spiritual origin of a thing is more important than its taste or its usefulness. Get ready. What you are about to hear changes the way we look at the table, nature, and life itself. This is Abel Flores, always grateful that you are here on our channel La Mishna TV to watch this class. And now, let's begin. The Mishnah we will study today is located in Berakhot chapter 6, teaching 4, and it says the following. If there were many types of food before him, over which one should he recite the blessing first? Rabbi Yehudah says, if among them there is one of the 7 species for which the land of Israel was praised, he should recite the blessing over it first. But the sages say, he may recite the blessing over whichever one he wishes. Allow me to invite you, calmly and with a touch of intellectual suspense, to a very everyday scene. Imagine the table set, several foods before you, each one awaiting its spiritual turn. And you, with the blessing on the tip of your tongue, ask yourself, to whom do I give the first word? It seems like a minor question, but in Judaism, we already know that behind the simple often hides a universe. And yes, here too, Chapter 6 of Berakhot opens precisely that universe. It deals with the blessings before eating, the Berakhot Rishonot, and defines which formula corresponds to each food and in what order they should be recited when there is variety on the plate. Our Mishnah specifically focuses on a very specific, almost surgical detail. When there are several foods, what defines the spiritual priority? Which blessing comes first? The Mishnah is brief, direct, and slightly provocative, because while Rabbi Yehudah defends an objective criterion, the Shivat Haminim, the 7 species, the sages propose something more human, personal choice, the food that is most dear to you, the famous principle of chaviv, beloved. And here the question that lies behind the text emerges. What defines the spiritual dignity of a food? Its sacred origin, or the intimate relationship that the diner has with it? To understand why Rabbi Yehudah gives so much priority to the 7 species, let's return to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 8, where the land of Israel is presented with unforgettable agricultural lyricism. A land of wheat and barley, of vines, figs, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land of wheat and barley, vines, fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and date honey. These 7 species are not just a botanical catalog. They are a declaration of identity. In the rabbinic tradition, they acquire a particular halakhic status. They take precedence in blessings, determine a more extensive subsequent blessing, the Berakhot Me'ain Shalosh, and function almost as a calling card of the Holy Land. When Rabbi Yehudah establishes that if they are present, they come first, it is not out of whim. It is because they symbolically represent the agricultural soul of Israel. But the sages, as good cosmic conversationalists, remind us of something subtle. Spirituality also involves subjective experience. If one has a pomegranate before them, a symbol of abundance, Ramon in Hebrew, whose root is linked to height and elevation. But what they really desire at that moment is a sweet date like on a Friday night. Then that preference has halakhic weight. Not only does geography speak, the heart also speaks. And here the Mishnah becomes delightfully human, because in daily practice, that is precisely what happens. One has a variety of foods, wants to eat more than one, and a technical doubt arises, which hides an existential question. What orders my spiritual life? The tradition that precedes me, or the inner desire that dwells within me? Halakha, true to its style, does not force us to choose between opposing poles. It recognizes both criteria. Sometimes we honor the objectivity of the land and its emblematic fruits. Other times, we honor the subjectivity of what is meaningful to us. The greatness of this Mishnah lies in that balance. Perhaps that is why the sages conclude, Mevaresh al eze mehem sheyirtze, bless over whichever one you want. As if to say, begin with what awakens gratitude in you. Because the Berakhot, in the end, is not a liturgical formality. It is an act of consciousness. If the food is dear to you, begin with it, and let your desire be transformed into a sacred word. And now, the lesson we take home. Life, like our table, often offers us several paths at the same time. Some have tradition, history, and prestige. Others simply call to us from within. This Mishnah reminds us that both can be valid, that priority is not always determined by external labels, but by authenticity. Sometimes the land of Israel points the way. Sometimes your own soul does. The important thing is to bless, to choose consciously, and to remember that even a small bite, if eaten with intention, can open a door to spirituality. And yes, that door, curiously, always opens from the inside. Now, imagine the scene. You're standing in front of several foods, all looking at you as if waiting their turn for a blessing. And you, with only a few seconds before eating, wonder what the Talmud says about this small but intriguing dilemma. In Berakhot 41a to 41b, the sages open the discussion and refine the Mishnah we already knew. The Talmud distinguishes two scenarios. First, when all the foods require the same blessing. For example, figs, dates, and apples, which all share hayetz. Here the classic debate arises. Rabbi Yehudah asserts that the 7 species of the land of Israel have objective priority. The sages, on the other hand, say that you can start with the food that appeals to you most. And one feels that the Talmud is looking at us with a smile. Sometimes tradition prevails. Sometimes the heart prevails. The second scenario is when the foods require different blessings. There, a more structured hierarchy appears, known as Maga Esh, Hamotzi, Mezonot, Hagafen, Ha'etz, Ha'adama, and Shahakol. As if the Talmud were saying, in certain cases, the priority is not emotional or geographical, but liturgical. In parallel, the sages introduce a fascinating principle, ikar and tafel, the main and the secondary. If one food is clearly the protagonist, and another only accompanies it, the blessing goes to the protagonist and covers the secondary one. And this idea helps to understand why, in certain contexts, the 7 species can function as the symbolic ikar of the table. The Rishonim delve deeper. Rashi explains that if the blessing is the same, Rabbi Yehudah would always give priority to the 7 species, even if you prefer another fruit. Tosafot softens the picture. There are situations where personal preference weighs more. Rambam proposes an elegant balance. The 7 species matter, yes, but the key is which food is central to your eating experience. It's not an automatic algorithm. The Halakha finally crystallizes in the Shulchan Aruch. If several fruits share ha'etz and one of them is one of the 7 species, that one goes first, even if it's not your favorite. If there are no fruits from the land of Israel, the whole fruit is chosen, or the one that is most beloved. And if the blessings are different, the classic order of categories is followed. But behind all this lies something deeper. Prioritizing the 7 species is not a technical maneuver. It is a spiritual declaration. They are the fruits with which the people of Israel experienced the Promised Land, the symbols of the transition from manna to agricultural responsibility. Blessing them first is to remember, in a simple gesture, the entire history of a people. And what do we do in practice? Very simple. If you have several fruits from a tree, identify those that come from the verse in Deuteronomy. Among them, prioritize according to their biblical order: olives, dates, grapes, figs, pomegranates. And if you have a date and a delicious apple, the Shulchan Aruch would say, start with the date, unless you don't even intend to eat it, because then it ceases to be in play. The Talmud, in the end, teaches us to order not only the table, but our consciousness, to recognize what is essential, what is beloved, and what is tradition. A small blessing, properly ordered, can become an act of memory and meaning. And that, in less than 3 minutes, is already a beautiful way to elevate a simple bite. Allow me to introduce you to a figure who appears so frequently in the Mishnah that we sometimes feel we know him without ever having truly looked at him. When the Mishnah simply says Rabbi Yehudah without a surname or further clarification, it almost always refers to Rabbi Yehudah bar Eli, a 4th-generation Tana, active in the 2nd century CE. And yes, he is the same one we encounter in Berakhot, debating with the clarity and firmness that characterize him. Rabbi Yehudah was one of Rabbi Akiva's most prominent disciples, inheriting from him that style of teaching that combines legal precision with spiritual depth. Imagine him as a young man, sitting in Akiva's inner circle, absorbing every nuance, every interpretive twist, and then, years later, becoming one of the most powerful voices in the Mishna himself. His influence is so widespread that the sages say that in many academies, when Halakha was taught as Rabbi Yehudah dictates, no one asked for clarification. His opinion was clear, structured, and above all, authoritative. It is no coincidence that he is one of the most frequently cited Tanaim. His presence permeates legal treatises, ethical discussions, and even descriptions of daily life. He was not just a legislator, he was an observer of the human soul. When you read Rabbi Yehudah in Berakhot, you are not encountering an isolated voice, but a master who shaped the very heart of the oral tradition. A sage who understood that halakha is not an abstract theory, but the way in which a people transforms every act, even the smallest, into a sacred gesture. Imagine we open chapter 6 of Berakhot as if unfolding an ancient map. There, 3 small Mishnayot appear, discreet but decisive, showing us how the sages considered every detail of food and blessing. And in each of them, like a stylistic signature, Rabbi Yehudah appears with his particular way of seeing the world. The first difference arises in Berakhot 6.1, where the Mishnah distinguishes between seeds, herbs, and vegetables. Regarding seeds, it says borei mine zeraim. Regarding herbs, borei mine deshaim. And regarding vegetables, the more familiar borei peri ha'adamah. But the Tosefta surprises us with the voice of Rabbi Yehudah, who proposes a different version. Baruch matzmiach ha'adamah bidvaro. Blessed are you, who makes the earth sprout by his word. Notice the subtlety of that matzmiach. It's not just recognizing a fruit, but the living process of sprouting. Some testimonies even suggest that Rabbi Yehudah wanted to reduce the use of the generic ha'adamah and concentrate attention on more precise categories, as if inviting us to look at the earth with a spiritual microscope, not just with a botanical catalog. The second difference appears in Berakhot 6.3, and here the tone changes. The Mishnah lists problematic foods, wine vinegar, poor or spoiled fruits, and even kosher locusts. Most of the sages teach that over all of them, one recites Shehakol Nehiyah Bidvaro, the blessing that covers what doesn't fit into any category. But Rabbi Yehudah raises his hand and says, over any kind of curse, min kelalah, no blessing is recited. Why? Because vinegar is the failure of wine. Unripe fruits are the result of adverse conditions, and locusts, well, locusts bring destruction. For him, it would be contradictory to bless God for something that arises precisely from a state of deterioration. Here Rabbi Yehudah shows us a trait that accompanies him throughout the Mishnah, an almost visceral ethical sensitivity towards what the land produces in blessing and in affliction. And we come to the third difference, Berakhot 6.4, which we have already discussed. The question is simple and commonplace. You have several foods. Which one do you recite the blessing over first? Rabbi Yehudah answers with his consistent logic. If there is one of the 7 species with which the land of Israel was praised, wheat, barley, grapevine, fig tree, pomegranate, olive tree, and date palm, begin with it. The sages, more flexible, say, recite the blessing over whichever one you wish. And once again we see Rabbi Yehudah insisting on the spiritual centrality of the land, on its capacity to order even the most humble table. 3 Mishnayot, 3 styles, one and the same voice. Rabbi Yehudah appears as a teacher who seeks precision in language, sensitivity to blessing, and profound fidelity to the land of Israel. And every blessing, even the smallest, thus becomes an act of consciousness, a way of remembering that the world is not only to be consumed, but also to be appreciated. In this part of the class, we're opening a window to let you know that if you're willing to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen, or by clicking the link below in the description of this video. Personally, I, Abel Flores, sincerely thank you for your contribution, because it helps us a lot in continuing to produce all this content, which is free for everyone, and thus giving more people the opportunity to learn about these ancient teachings. You can also help us a lot by subscribing to this channel, La Mishnah TV, giving us a like, and sharing this video on your social media and messaging apps. Thank you very much. In addition, you should know that on our website, lamishnah.com, you will find all these classes, supporting material, texts, articles, reports, and supplementary information for our free course on the Mishnah. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're continuing with our class. When one compares these 3 differences between Rabbi Yehudah and the sages, what emerges is not a simple technical disagreement, but 2 ways of viewing food as a spiritual act, 2 lenses that illuminate, each in its own way, the same table. The first difference revolves around a seemingly minor question. Is a generic blessing sufficient for herbs, or does each category deserve its own nuance? The sages prefer a stable structure. Borei peri ha'adama encompasses a huge variety of plants, thus keeping the system orderly. But Rabbi Yehudah focuses on the detail. He wants the blessing to name the divine act of causing to sprout, matzmiach ha'adama bidvaro. He doesn't just give thanks for the finished product. He gives thanks for the process, the spark of continuous creation. For him, the blessing is not just gratitude. It is a small liturgy of creation. And in that theological poetry, the sages respond with pragmatism. Too many formulas can confuse more than inspire. Halakha, true to that practical balance, adopts their approach. The second difference is more dramatic. Do we bless food that originates from a curse? Vinegar that was spoiled wine, fruits deformed by drought, locusts that devastate fields. The sages say, if the person obtains a legitimate benefit, recite shehakol. The blessing looks at the present good, not the dark history of the product. Rabbi Yehudah, on the other hand, cannot separate origin and destiny. If something arises from a phenomenon described by the Torah as a curse, blessing it would be almost a contradiction. For him, the blessing must be consistent with the divine evaluation of the world. Again, 2 styles. The sages see the human moment. Rabbi Yehudah, the moral structure of the universe. And yet, Halakha ends up following the pragmatic approach. When there is something to enjoy, and it is permitted, one blesses it. The third difference concerns the priority among foods. The sages say, begin with what you desire. The spiritual experience is strengthened when it starts from an authentic place. Rabbi Yehudah responds in his characteristic tone. There are foods that bear a national and biblical seal. If one of the 7 species, wheat, barley, grapevine, fig, pomegranate, olive, date, is present, the blessing must first honor that privileged channel of the land of Israel. This is not about personal taste, but about collective memory. What is fascinating is how each debate reveals its underlying philosophy. The sages construct an accessible system centered on the person reciting the blessing. Rabbi Yehudah erects a symbolic structure. The blessing reflects creation, theological coherence, and the spiritual identity of the people. And yet, the final Halakha, Jewish law, blends both voices. It adopts the priority of the 7 species, but maintains the simplicity of Ha-Adama, the blessing for produce of the earth, and the pragmatism of Shahakol, the blessing for everything else. 3 debates, 1 message. Food is not just nourishment. It is a mirror reflecting how we understand the world, history, and God. And every bite, properly blessed, can become a small act of contemplation. If we look at Rabbi Yehudah's 3 arguments against the sages as a single landscape, a surprising coherence emerges. In all 3 cases, the focus is not on botany or gastronomy, but on something deeper. What is a min, a species, and what does its origin mean spiritually? That is the compass with which Rabbi Yehudah interprets the table. On the subject of herbs and vegetables, he wants the blessing to name the actual growth. What sprouts? What emerges? The divine act in the present continuous. The sages, on the other hand, prefer an operating system, with fewer formulas and more practical clarity. It is the eternal tension between symbolic precision and pedagogical functionality. In the discussion about the cursed minim, Rabbi Yehudah again draws his theological map. If a food is born from decay, blight, or destruction, it belongs to a mean marked by the curse. How can one bless what the Torah itself describes as a transgression? The sages respond with a more human sensitivity, even if its origin is negative. If here and now the person receives a legitimate benefit, there is room for shehakol. The blessing looks at the present good, not the agricultural tragedy that preceded it. And finally, the 7 species. For Rabbi Yehudah, they are the blessed mean par excellence, the one the Torah uses to praise the land of Israel. That is why his liturgical priority is objective, national, almost ontological. The sages again introduce flexibility. If there is no clear hierarchy, personal experience, what is most dear to you, can guide the first blessing. When one puts all these pieces together, Rabbi Yehudah's vision appears clearly. The blessing is a metaphysical declaration about the world. Each min has its spiritual DNA. Some represent blessing, others curse, others the creative act. And the liturgy must align with that map. The sages share the general idea, but moderate it with functionality, with psychology, and with pedagogy. That the blessing should inspire, not overwhelm. The halakhic result reflects this delicate balance. In the case of herbs and species of lesser importance, the halakha follows the pragmatic approach of the sages. But in the prioritization of the 7 species, the system adopts the powerful intuition of Rabbi Yehudah. As if tradition were saying, let us preserve their symbolism where it shines brightest, and maintain flexibility where daily life requires it. Thus, between ontology and experience, between the symbolic map and the actual table, the Halakha ultimately teaches us that blessing is not just saying words. It is learning to look at the world with a refined awareness, without losing either depth or humanity. I would like to take you for a few minutes on a short journey through the agricultural, spiritual, and symbolic heart of the land of Israel. Because the 7 species are not just a biblical inventory, they are the way the Torah describes the profound identity of a land and a people. It all begins in Deuteronomy chapter 8:8, with that phrase that almost sounds like ancient poetry. A land of wheat and barley, of vines, fig trees, and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. And here it is worth remembering an important detail. The honey is not from bees, but from dates. That thick syrup was the basic sweetener of ancient Israel. This is how the classic list is formed: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. 7 fruits the Jewish law considers distinctive of Eretz Israel, almost like its spiritual ambassadors. Historically, these products were neither ornament nor abstract symbol. They were the basis of the diet and the economy. Wheat and barley marked the rhythm of the agricultural year and the festivals. Barley at Passover, wheat at Shavuot. The vine was wine, and wine was joy, medicine, and ritual. Figs and dates nourished travelers and shepherds. Pomegranates and olives combined food, aesthetics, and spirituality. And when the Israelites went up to Jerusalem with Bikurim, the first fruits, they only brought these 7 species, as if the land itself spoke through them. Each one has its character. Wheat, the basis of bread and a symbol of human intelligence. Barley, more rustic, associated with the instinctive that needs refinement. The grape, which is transformed into wine and represents joy, beauty, and balance. The fig, which must be eaten at its exact ripeness, like wisdom that is savored in its time. The pomegranate, with its abundance of seeds, a symbol of mitzvot and perseverance. The olive tree, whose oil always rises to the top and symbolizes identity, light, and resilience. And the date, straight as the palm tree, an image of the righteous person who remains upright. Therefore, when the Mishnah and the Halakha give them priority in the blessings, it is not a technical whim. It is a recognition that these 7 fruits are the bridge between the land, the history, and the spirituality of Israel. Eating them, blessing them, and remembering them is almost a way of returning home, even when one is far away. When one explores this entire map, from the halakhic priority to the spiritual symbolism, one discovers that the 7 species are not simply 7 foods. They are an entire pedagogy of how to view life. In practice, the halakha teaches us to give them priority in the blessings when they share a category with other fruits. It's not just a simple protocol, it's a reminder, in the very first word of the blessing, that there are fruits that represent the profound relationship between Israel and its land. Even within them, there is an internal order, calculated according to the proximity of each word to land in Deuteronomy 8:8, granting the olive and the date a particularly elevated place. Then comes the after blessing, the beautiful Me'en Shalosh. We don't say Borei Nefashot over wheat, wine, or the fruits of these species, but a blessing that summarizes the first sections of the Birkat Hamazon. And when they come from Eretz Israel, the text itself obliges us to name the land and its fruits, as if geography were transformed into theology. Eating, suddenly, is remembering where history comes from. The exclusivity of the 7 species in the Bikurim reinforces this same idea. Only they were worthy of being brought to the temple as first fruits, and only in their best quality, as if the relationship with God demanded not only gratitude, but excellence, offering the best of what the land blesses us with. And this presence permeates the year. On Tu B'Shvat, the 7 species become the protagonists of the Seder. On Sukkot and Shavuot, they return as agricultural echoes of the harvest and the first fruits. Even in ancient Jewish art, coins, mosaics, synagogues, they appear as a visual seal of identity. And today they remain alive in logos, jewelry, designs, and entire fields that continue a millennia-old tradition. But perhaps the deepest reading emerges from the masters of symbolism. Wheat and barley as sustenance, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates as pleasure, beauty, and joy. The land not only nourishes, it beautifies life. And from a Kabbalistic perspective, each species reflects a sephirah, an inner quality that human beings can refine. Eating consciously then becomes an act of spiritual work, cultivating the goodness of wheat, the discipline of barley, the light of the olive tree, or the righteousness of the date. In the end, the message is simple and profound. When the Torah chooses these 7 species to praise the land, it is saying that the covenant between God, the people, and the land is also lived out at the table. Every blessing, every bite, every remembrance of Deuteronomy 8 is a way of renewing that covenant. The Promised Land is not just a place. It is an experience that is savored, blessed, and appreciated day after day. That's all for today's lesson. Until the next video. Shalom.